The galactic trade vessel Eternal Commerce drifted through the empty space between star systems. Captain Al stood on the command bridge with his 4 arms folded behind his back. His scaled skin reflected the blue light from dozens of control screens. He had commanded this ship for 30 standard cycles. He had seen strange things. He had traded with species from 100 different worlds, but nothing had prepared him for the human. Had joined the crew 6 months ago at the station. The hearing board had warned Al about humans. They said humans were unpredictable. They said humans formed strange emotional bonds. They said humans kept pack animals as companions. Al had ignored all these warnings. Humans were excellent engineers. They could fix anything. They worked long hours without complaint. The Trade Council paid extra credits for ships that carried human crew members because human ships rarely broke down. Brought 2 small creatures with him. He called them dogs. He called them Biscuit and Gravy. Al had looked at these animals with confusion. They were small. They had 4 legs and fur. They had wet noses and wagging tails. They made high-pitched sounds when they were happy. Explained that on Earth these animals had once been wolves. Wolves were pack hunters. Wolves were dangerous predators. But humans had taken these wolves thousands of years ago and made them smaller, made them friendly, made them companions. The crew had been terrified at first. The people in the engine room refused to work near the dogs. They said the dogs had the eyes of hunters. The navigation team kept their distance. They said the dogs smelled like death, but had smiled and let the dogs meet everyone slowly. Within 3 weeks, the entire crew loved Biscuit and Gravy. The small female dog Biscuit would curl up in the lap of anyone who sat still long enough. The larger male dog Gravy would bring toys to crew members and wait for them to play. Al himself had developed a fondness for the creatures. They did not judge. They did not scheme. They simply existed with pure joy. He understood now why humans kept these tiny wolves. They were reminders of simpler times. They were sources of comfort in the cold darkness between stars. The trouble began at the trading hub called Nexus 17. This station floated at the intersection of 12 major shipping lanes. Thousands of ships docked here every cycle. Millions of beings walked its metal corridors. The station sold everything: legal goods, illegal goods, services of every kind. Al had business with a weapons dealer on the lower levels. The Eternal Commerce needed new defensive cannons. Pirate activity had increased near the outer rim. He took a security team to complete the transaction. Had left Biscuit and Gravy in his quarters. He had set up their food and water. He had given them toys to play with. He had asked his friend from the maintenance crew to check on them. Everything seemed safe. The ship remained docked with minimal crew aboard. Standard procedure. Nothing to worry about. The weapons dealer was a named Slink. Were thin creatures with 6 limbs and compound eyes. They spoke in rapid clicking sounds that the translator struggled to process. Slink offered quality cannons at reasonable prices. The negotiation took 4 hours. Al was pleased with the final agreement. Had helped by pointing out flaws in some of the older models. His engineering knowledge had saved the ship 2,000 credits. They returned to the Eternal Commerce in good spirits. Al ordered immediate departure. He wanted to reach their next destination before the solar storms began. The crew began preparations for launch. Engines warmed up. Navigation plotted their course. Everything seemed normal until screamed. Al had never heard a human scream before. The sound was primal. It came from somewhere deep inside. It echoed through the metal corridors of the ship. Every crew member froze. Al rushed toward the sound. He found standing in the doorway of his quarters. The room had been destroyed. Furniture was overturned. The walls had scratches on them. The food and water bowls were scattered across the floor, but the dogs were gone. Stood completely still. His hands were shaking. His eyes moved around the room looking for any sign of his companions. Lay unconscious in the corner. There was purple blood on his forehead. Someone had attacked him. Someone had taken the dogs. Al tried to speak but was already moving. The human ran to the ship's security station. He accessed the internal cameras. His fingers moved faster than Al had ever seen a human move. Within seconds had found the footage. 3 figures in dark clothing had entered the ship during the negotiations. They had stunned. They had grabbed the dogs. They had left through an emergency airlock on the lower deck. Zoomed in on the footage, he enhanced the image. He found a symbol on the clothing of one of the intruders. It was a circle with a serpent inside. Al recognized it immediately. His blood went cold. The Collective of Flesh. Every spacefaring species knew about the Collective. They were criminals of the worst kind. They captured rare creatures from across the galaxy. They sold these creatures to wealthy collectors. They processed animals for exotic foods. They conducted experiments that no ethical society would allow. The Collective operated from hidden bases. They moved constantly. They paid bribes to station security. They were almost impossible to catch. Al placed a hand on shoulder. He tried to be gentle. He tried to be kind. He explained that the dogs were gone. The Collective worked fast. By now the dogs could be on any of 100 ships heading in 100 different directions. The search would be impossible. The cost would be enormous. The danger would be extreme. For the good of the crew and the mission, they had to accept this loss and move forward. Turned to look at Al. The captain had seen many expressions on many faces in his long career. He had seen rage. He had seen sorrow. He had seen madness, but he had never seen what he saw in his eyes at that moment. It was something beyond emotion. It was cold. It was focused. It was the look of a hunter who had just identified his prey. "Captain," said in a voice that was too calm, "I am going to find my dogs. I am going to bring them home. Anyone who stands in my way will regret it." Al tried to respond but was already walking toward the bridge. The human moved with purpose. Every step was deliberate. The crew members in the corridor stepped aside without being asked. They could sense something had changed. They could feel the tension in the air. On the bridge approached the communication station. He began sending messages. Al watched as the human contacted every informant network in the sector, offered credits for information. He offered favors. He offered threats. Within 30 minutes, responses started arriving. A dock worker on Nexus 17 had seen a ship leave in a hurry. A cargo handler had noticed unusual containers being loaded. A security guard had been paid to look the other way, gathered every piece of information. He built a picture in his mind. He traced the movement of the Collective ship through the station's traffic logs. The ship was called the Harvester. It was fast. It was armed. It was currently heading toward the nebula. The nebula was a region of dense gas and radiation that made sensors useless. It was the perfect hiding place for criminals. The Harvester would reach the nebula in 6 hours. Once inside, no one would be able to track it. Turned to Al. "Captain, I need to borrow your ship." Al shook his head. This was madness. The Eternal Commerce was a trade vessel. It had minimal weapons. It had slow engines. Chasing a criminal ship into the nebula was suicide. The crew had families. They had lives. They could not risk everything for 2 small animals. "Then I will buy the ship," said. He pulled out his personal data pad. He began transferring credits. "I have savings from 12 years of engineering work. I will give you everything I have. Take the crew to the nearest station. I will do this alone." The bridge went silent. Every crew member stared at. They watched as numbers appeared on the main screen. The human was transferring his entire life savings, every credit he had ever earned, every bit of security he had built, all for 2 small creatures with wagging tails. Al felt something shift inside him. He looked around at his crew. He saw the same confusion on their faces. Then he saw something else. He saw understanding. He saw respect. He saw crew members standing a little. First engineer stepped forward. The old had served on the Eternal Commerce for 20 cycles. He had gray scales and tired eyes, but those eyes now had fire in them. "Captain," said, "I would like to volunteer for this mission. Those tiny wolves trusted us. They slept in our laps. They brought us joy. We cannot abandon them." Second navigator spoke next. She was young for her species. She had only been on the ship for 2 cycles, but her voice was strong. I agree. The human risked his life savings without hesitation. This is what pack loyalty looks like. This is what the humans call family. I want to be part of this family. One by one, the crew members spoke. Each offered their support. Each pledged to help. Al felt his heart swell with emotion. He had commanded this ship for 30 cycles. He had never been more proud of his crew than at this moment. Very well, Al announced. Set course for the nebula, maximum speed. All hands prepare for combat operations. Looked at the captain with surprise. You would risk everything for my dogs. Al allowed himself a rare smile. They are not just your dogs anymore, human. They are our tiny wolves, and no one takes pack members from this ship without consequences. The Eternal Commerce turned away from Nexus 17. Its engines roared to life. The stars blurred as the ship accelerated. They had 6 hours to catch the Harvester, 6 hours to plan an attack against a superior vessel, 6 hours to prepare for a battle that logic said they could not win. But logic did not account for a human protecting his family. Logic did not account for a crew united by purpose. Logic did not account for the terrible things that happen when you threaten what a human loves. In his cabin, prepared his equipment. He checked his tools. He loaded his weapons. He reviewed the ship layouts that his contacts had sent. Somewhere out in the darkness, his dogs were scared and confused. They did not understand why their home had been violated. They did not understand why strangers had taken them away, but understood, and was coming. The hunt had begun. The Eternal Commerce pushed through the void at speeds it was never designed to reach. Chief Engineer stood in the engine room with sweat dripping from his scaled forehead. The main reactor glowed with dangerous intensity. Warning lights flashed across every console. The ship was straining against the laws of physics itself. Current output at 140%, reported a junior engineer named Toss. The young checked his readings 3 times because he could not believe them. Hull temperature rising. Structural stress approaching critical levels. Wiped his face with a rag. Push it to 150, we need more speed. That could damage the engines permanently. Then we fix them later, right now we chase. Worked alongside the engineering team. His hands moved with practiced skill as he rewired power conduits. He rerouted energy from non-essential systems. He shut down gravity generators in empty sections of the ship. Every bit of power he could find went into the engines. On the bridge, Captain Al watched the sensor readings with growing concern. The Harvester remained ahead of them. The criminal ship was faster. It was pulling away slowly but steadily. At current rates, they would reach the nebula 20 minutes before the Eternal Commerce. 20 minutes was enough time to disappear forever. We need more speed, Al said through the intercom. His voice came back immediately. Working on it, Captain. Give me 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes stretched into eternity. The bridge crew sat in tense silence. Navigator plotted adjustment after adjustment to their course. She found shortcuts through asteroid fields. She calculated gravity slingshots around distant planets. She shaved seconds off their arrival time wherever possible. But it was not enough. Then the ship lurched, the lights flickered. A deep hum filled every corridor. Something had changed in the engine room. The sensor readings jumped. Speed increased. The gap between the 2 ships stopped growing. It started shrinking. Engineering, Al called out. Report. His voice sounded tired but excited. The human did something impossible. He connected the backup reactor directly to the main drive. We are now running at 170% capacity. Speed increased by 40%. 170%. The safety limits exist for a reason. The human says safety is for ships that are not chasing kidnappers. Al could not argue with that logic. He watched the display as the Eternal Commerce slowly gained on the Harvester. The criminal ship noticed the pursuit. It began evasive maneuvers. It released countermeasures. It tried to lose them in the debris field of a destroyed moon, but the eternal commerce stayed on course. Appeared on the bridge 30 minutes later. His clothes were covered in grease and burn marks. His hands were bandaged from touching hot metal, but his eyes burned with determination. "I can give you more," he said to Al, "but I need your permission." "More? We are already beyond every safety standard." "There is a technique human engineers use in emergencies. We call it a cascade burn. It feeds fuel directly into the reactor core without the normal cooling systems. The power output doubles. The engines will burn out within 2 hours, but for those 2 hours you have unstoppable speed." Al considered this carefully. Burning out the engines would leave them stranded in space. Rescue could take days or weeks. The cost of new engines would bankrupt the ship's accounts. It was an enormous risk for an uncertain reward. "If we do this," Al asked, "can we catch them before the nebula?" Nodded. "We will not just catch them, we will overtake them." "And the crew?" "The cascade burn is dangerous but controllable. I will stay in the engine room the entire time. If anything goes wrong, I will shut it down manually. The crew will be safe." Al looked at his bridge officers. He saw no fear in their faces. He saw only resolve. These beings had committed themselves to this mission. They trusted their captain to make the right choice. "Do it," Al ordered. Disappeared below decks. 5 minutes later, the ship transformed. The engine room became an inferno of controlled chaos. Plasma arced between conduits. The reactor pulsed with blinding light. The hull groaned under forces it was never meant to withstand. But the eternal commerce shot forward like a predator lunging at prey. The numbers on the display changed rapidly. 180%, 190%. Then the impossible number appeared, 200%. The eternal commerce was running at double its designed capacity. Engineers across the galaxy would have called this suicide. Shipbuilders would have said the vessel should have torn itself apart. But the old trade ship held together through determination and spite. The Harvester's captain noticed the sudden burst of speed. His name was, and he had commanded criminal vessels for 2 decades. He had outrun patrol ships and bounty hunters. He had escaped ambushes and traps, but he had never seen a trade vessel move like this. It should not be possible. The laws of engineering did not allow it. "What is that ship doing?" demanded. He was a species known for their cruelty. His body was covered in sharp spines. His eyes were red and calculating. He had no mercy in his heart for anyone or anything. His pilot checked the sensors multiple times. "Sir, their engines are running at 200% capacity. They are burning themselves out to catch us." "For what? We took nothing of value. Just 2 small animals and some minor cargo." "Perhaps the animals are valuable." Pulled up the inventory from the raid. 2 canines from Earth. Common pets. Worth maybe a few thousand credits to the right collector. Nothing special. Certainly nothing worth destroying a ship over. The behavior made no sense. "Open communications," ordered. "I want to talk to whoever is commanding that vessel." The screen flickered. Captain Al appeared. Behind him stood a human with fire in his eyes, had dealt with many species. He knew how to read body language. The human was the key to this situation. The human was driving this insane pursuit. "Trade vessel," said smoothly. "You are damaging your ship for no reason. We can negotiate. Name your price for the animals. I am a reasonable businessman." The human pushed forward. His voice cut through the transmission like a blade. "My name is, you have taken my dogs. You have exactly 1 chance to return them unharmed. Slow your engines, prepare for boarding, surrender my family to me." Laughed. It was a harsh sound full of contempt. "Your family, they are animals, they are property. They will be sold to a collector on the outer rim. The buyer plans to eat them at a dinner party. Exotic earth meat is quite popular among the wealthy." Something changed in the human's face. The fire in his eyes became ice. The tension in his body became stillness. Had seen warriors prepare for battle. He had seen killers embrace their nature. But he had never seen a transformation like this. The human before him was no longer a person. He had become something else entirely. "You should not have told me that," said quietly. "I was going to give you a chance to live. That chance no longer exists." Cut the communication. A chill ran down his spine. He was not a creature who felt fear easily, but something about that human had unsettled him deeply. "Increase speed," he ordered. "Dump cargo if necessary. Reach the nebula at all costs." The harvester pushed its engines harder. Cargo containers ejected into space. Weight decreased. Speed increased. But it was not enough. The burning trade vessel behind them continued to close the gap. On the Eternal Commerce, the crew prepared for combat. Security Chief distributed weapons from the armory. The warrior had served in 2 different wars before becoming a merchant guard. He trained his team with quick efficiency. They practiced boarding procedures. They studied the layout of criminal vessels. Worked with the team despite having no military training. He learned how to clear corridors. He learned how to breach doors. He learned how to move with lethal purpose. The security team watched him adapt with surprising speed. "You learn quickly for a civilian," commented. "I have motivation," replied. The nebula loomed ahead. Purple gases swirled in endless patterns. Lightning crackled between clouds of charged particles. Sensors became useless past the outer boundary. Ships entering the nebula flew blind. The harvester reached the edge first. It dove into the clouds and disappeared from sensors. The Eternal Commerce arrived 30 seconds later. Al did not hesitate. He ordered the ship to follow. Darkness swallowed them. The viewports showed nothing but swirling gas. The ship shook as radiation bombarded its hull. Navigation became impossible through normal means. They should have been lost immediately. But had prepared for this. While working on the engines, he had also modified the sensor array. He had created a new detection system based on gravitational fluctuations. It was imprecise. It could only detect large metal objects within a few kilometers, but in the blindness of the nebula it was enough. "Contact ahead," reported. "Distance 3 kilometers. They have slowed down. They think they lost us." Al smiled. "Take us in quiet. Cut primary engines. Use maneuvering thrusters only." The Eternal Commerce crept through the purple clouds like a ghost. The crew worked in near silence. Even their breathing seemed too loud. Every moment brought them closer to the enemy vessel. Stood at the airlock with the boarding team. His heart pounded in his chest. Somewhere on that ship his dogs waited for him. They did not know rescue was coming. They only knew fear and confusion. The thought made his jaw clench with rage. The ships grew closer. 1 kilometer, 500 meters, 200 meters. The harvester remained unaware. Its crew assumed they had escaped. They did not see death approaching through the fog. "Contact in 60 seconds, Al announced. "All hands prepare for combat." Checked his weapon one final time. It was a plasma cutter modified for combat. Not elegant but effective. He had built it himself from spare parts. The tool that had saved ships would now be used to take lives. The Eternal Commerce emerged from the clouds directly beside the harvester. For a moment both ships hung in space together. Then the trading vessel fired. Its new defensive cannons had not been installed yet, but the old ones still worked. Energy beams slammed into the harvester's engine section. Fire bloomed in the darkness. The airlock doors burst open. Magnetic grapples shot across the gap between ships. The boarding team launched themselves into the void, flew with them. The cold of space touched his suit for only seconds before he crashed into the harvester's hull. Cut through the outer plating with a plasma torch. The metal screamed as it melted away. Air rushed out from the hole. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut inside the enemy ship. The boarding team dropped through the breach into a storage corridor. Alarms blared, red lights flashed. The harvester's crew responded with weapons fire. Energy bolts flew through narrow passages. The security team returned fire with precision. Bodies fell on both sides. Did not stop to fight. He pushed past the combat toward the interior of the ship. His modified sensors showed life signs ahead, two small signatures that could only be his dogs. They were alive. They were close. Nothing would stop him from reaching them. A guard appeared around a corner. Raised his weapon, was faster. His plasma cutter burned through armor and flesh alike. The guard collapsed without making a sound. More enemies appeared, moved through them with terrible efficiency. He was not a soldier. He had never killed before this day. But something primal had awakened inside him. Something ancient that humans had carried since they first walked upright on Earth. The protector instinct. The pack defender. He reached a heavy door marked with containment symbols. His sensors showed both dogs inside. They were still alive. They were scared but unharmed. Allowed himself a moment of relief before focusing on the door. The lock was sophisticated, military-grade encryption, designed to keep prisoners inside and rescuers out. It would take a normal person hours to crack. Had it open in 90 seconds. He was an engineer. Locks were just puzzles with moving parts. The door slid open. Inside were cages stacked from floor to ceiling. Creatures from dozens of worlds huddled in fear. Some were rare. Some were endangered. All had been stolen from their homes for profit, but only saw two faces. Two furry faces with big eyes and wagging tails. Biscuit and Gravy barked with joy when they saw him. They pushed against their cage doors. They whimpered and cried, ran to them. His hands fumbled with the cage latches. Then they were in his arms, soft fur against his face, wet noses pressing against his cheeks, tails wagging so hard their whole bodies shook. Tears ran down his face. He did not try to stop them. His family was safe. Nothing else mattered. But the mission was not over. Other creatures remained caged. Other lives needed saving. Looked around at all the frightened beings. He could not leave them behind. He would not leave them behind. Hold on, he told his dogs. We have more work to do. He began opening cages. Creatures fled into the corridor seeking safety. Some could walk. Some could fly. Some slithered or crawled. All moved toward the breach in the hull where freedom waited. The fighting continued elsewhere on the ship. Reported through the communicator that resistance was weakening. Captain had retreated to the bridge. His remaining crew were surrendering or dying. Victory was close. Carried his dogs through the chaos. He stepped over bodies. He ignored the sounds of battle. He focused only on returning home. The boarding team formed around him as he approached the breach. They protected him with their bodies. They had come too far to lose the mission now. Back on the Eternal Commerce, the crew watched as beings of all shapes and sizes crossed from one ship to the other. The cargo bay filled with rescued creatures. Medics treated injuries. Translators helped frightened beings understand they were safe. Stepped through the airlock with a dog under each arm. Cheering erupted from the crew. They had done it. Against all odds and reason they had succeeded. The tiny wolves were home. Captain Al approached with obvious emotion. His forearms spread wide in the traditional gesture of welcome. You recovered them, Al said. I was not certain it was possible. Smiled through his exhaustion. You gave me a ship, the crew gave me hope. How could I fail? Behind them the harvester drifted powerlessly. Its engines were destroyed. Its crew was captured or dead. Captain had been taken alive. He would face justice on a dozen different worlds for his crimes. But justice was a concern for later. Right now, the Eternal Commerce needed to escape the nebula before their damaged engines failed completely. The cascade burn had done exactly what predicted. The main drive was dying. They had perhaps an hour of power remaining. All hands, Al announced over the ship-wide speakers. Prepare for emergency return. We are going home. The old trade vessel turned toward the edge of the nebula. Its engines coughed and sputtered. Warning lights flashed in every section, but it moved. Slowly and painfully it moved. Sat on the floor of the cargo bay with biscuit and gravy in his lap. Other rescued creatures gathered around him. They sensed safety in his presence. They sensed the calm that came from a pack leader who had won his battle. "It will be okay," told them all. "You are with us now, we protect our own." The words were meant for animals that could not understand them, but somehow they seemed to understand anyway. The fear in the cargo bay began to fade. It was replaced by something else, something like trust. The Eternal Commerce limped through the purple clouds toward open space. Its crew was tired. Its hull was damaged. Its engines were failing. But its spirit was unbroken. They had proven that pack loyalty was stronger than any obstacle. They had proven that tiny wolves were worth fighting for. And somewhere in the galaxy, other criminals heard rumors about what happened. Stories spread about a trade vessel that burned itself nearly to death for two small Earth animals. Stories about a human who tore through an entire ship to reach his pets. Stories that made predators think twice before targeting human vessels. The hunt was over, but the legend was just beginning. The Eternal Commerce emerged from the nebula with smoke trailing from its hull. Emergency beacons activated automatically. Distress signals broadcast across every frequency. The ship was dying, but its crew was alive. Rescue vessels arrived within 3 hours. A patrol cruiser from the Galactic Commerce Protection Fleet was first on the scene. Its captain had been tracking smuggling operations in the sector. He was not prepared for what he found. A trade vessel with burned-out engines, 37 rescued beings from illegal captivity, a captured criminal captain in the brig, and a crew that looked like they had been through a war. The patrol captain demanded an explanation. Captain Al provided one. The story took 2 hours to tell completely. The patrol captain listened without interruption. His expression shifted from skepticism to amazement to something approaching awe. When Al finished, the patrol captain stood in silence for a long moment. "You destroyed your own engines," he said slowly. "You burned through your reactor safety limits. You attacked a superior vessel in a radiation nebula, all for 2 small Earth pets." Al nodded. "They are not pets, they are family." The patrol captain looked at sitting in the corner with biscuit and gravy sleeping in his lap. The human was exhausted beyond words. He had not slept since the dogs were taken. His body was covered in cuts and burns from the fighting, but he smiled softly as he stroked their fur. "Humans," the patrol captain muttered, "your species never makes sense to me." Looked up with tired eyes. "We make perfect sense, Captain. You just have to understand our priorities. We protect what we love. Nothing else matters when family is threatened." The patrol cruiser towed the Eternal Commerce to the nearest repair station. The cost of fixing the engines would be enormous. The ship would need to spend months in dock. The crew would need to find temporary work elsewhere. It seemed like a disaster. But then something unexpected happened. Word spread about what the Eternal Commerce had done. Other ship captains heard the story. They heard about the Cascade burn. They heard about the boarding action. They heard about a crew that sacrificed everything for tiny wolves. Donations began arriving. Credits transferred from accounts across the sector. Messages of support flooded the communication systems. The story had touched something in beings from 100 different worlds. They understood loyalty. They understood love. They wanted to reward those who demonstrated these qualities under impossible circumstances. Within 2 weeks, the repair costs were covered. Within a month, the ship was restored to full operation. New engines were installed that exceeded the original specifications. The defensive cannons that Al had purchased were mounted with additional weapons donated by a grateful weapons manufacturer. The Eternal Commerce emerged from dock stronger than ever before. But the donations were only the beginning. The rescued beings that had freed from the Harvester spread across the galaxy. Each one told their own story of salvation. They described the human who opened their cages. They described the crew that protected them during the escape. They spoke of kindness in the darkness of space. A wealthy collector whose rare companion had been among the rescued offered a reward of 1,000,000 credits, refused the money but asked for a favor instead. He wanted the collector to fund rescue operations for other captured creatures. The collector agreed and established a foundation in the name of Biscuit and Gravy. Within 1 year, this foundation had freed over 10,000 beings from illegal captivity. Captain faced trial on 7 different worlds for his crimes. Each trial resulted in conviction. His sentences would keep him imprisoned for the rest of his natural life. The collective of flesh suffered a severe blow to their operations. Several of their hidden bases were exposed by information recovered from the Harvester. Patrol fleets raided these locations and arrested hundreds of criminals. The galaxy was becoming a slightly safer place, and it all started with 2 small dogs. On the Eternal Commerce, life returned to normal patterns. The crew resumed their trading routes. They carried cargo between star systems. They negotiated deals with merchants and manufacturers, but something had changed among them. A bond had formed that went beyond professional cooperation. Crew members who had never spoken before became friends. Species that historically distrusted each other found common ground. They had fought together. They had risked together. They had proven their loyalty beyond any doubt. These experiences created connections that would last lifetimes. Biscuit and Gravy became unofficial mascots of the ship. Every crew member considered themselves partially responsible for the dogs. They took turns playing with them. They competed to give the best treats. They argued about which dog was smarter or more loyal. The debates were friendly and endless. Al noticed the changes with quiet satisfaction. He had commanded this ship for 30 cycles, but never felt truly connected to his crew until now. They were no longer just employees working for credits. They were pack members bound by shared struggle. The captain called a meeting in the main cargo bay. Every crew member attended. Even those who should have been sleeping or working appeared at the gathering. Al stood on a cargo container to address them all. "We did something remarkable," he began. "We proved that profit is not the only measure of value. We showed that bonds between beings matter more than logic or safety. I am proud to serve with each of you." The crew responded with cheers and applause. Different species made sounds of approval in their own ways. The cargo bay filled with a symphony of celebration. Stood near the back holding his dogs. Tears filled his eyes again. These beings from across the galaxy had become his extended family. They had risked their lives for creatures they barely understood. They had given everything because he asked them to. Al continued his speech. "I have decided to make a permanent change to our ship's charter. From this day forward, the Eternal Commerce recognizes companion animals as crew members with full protection rights. No being aboard this ship will ever be considered cargo. No being will ever be left behind." More cheering erupted. Crew members gathered around to congratulate him. Hands and claws and tentacles patted his back and shoulders. Biscuit and Gravy received so many pets that their tails became blurs of motion. The story of the Eternal Commerce spread further and wider as months passed. Other human vessels adopted similar charter changes. The concept of pack loyalty became discussed in trade councils and diplomatic meetings. Some species began to understand why humans were so successful in the galaxy. It was not their strength. Many species were stronger. It was not their intelligence. Many species were smarter. It was not their technology. Many species were more advanced. It was their capacity for connection. Their ability to form bonds that transcended rational calculation. Their willingness to sacrifice for those they loved. A philosopher wrote an essay about this phenomenon. He called it the human pack principle. His thesis argued that humans viewed their relationships as extensions of themselves. Harming a human's loved ones was identical to harming the human directly. This made them predictable in one sense and terrifying in another. You could always rely on humans to protect their pack. You could always trust them to fight for those they loved. But if you threatened their pack, you would face consequences beyond reason. They would burn their ships. They would sacrifice their futures. They would walk through fire and void to reach you. The essay became widely read across civilized space. It was taught in diplomatic training programs. It was discussed in military strategy sessions. It changed how many species approached interactions with humans. Traders learned to respect human crews and their companion animals. Pirates learned to avoid ships with human marks. Criminals learned that some targets were simply too dangerous regardless of the apparent reward. The galaxy adapted to this new understanding. On the Eternal Commerce celebrated the one-year anniversary of the rescue with a special party. The crew decorated the cargo bay with lights and banners. They prepared foods from a dozen different worlds. They invited representatives from species whose members had been saved from the harvester. Biscuit and Gravy wore small bow ties for the occasion. They wandered through the celebration receiving attention and treats from everyone. They had gained weight from all the love they received. The ship's doctor had gently suggested a diet, had gently ignored this suggestion. Al stood beside watching the festivities. The captain had aged visibly in the past year. His scales showed more gray. His movements were slower, but his eyes sparkled with contentment. "I never expected this outcome," Al admitted. "When you demanded we pursue those criminals, I thought you had lost your mind. I thought we would all die in the nebula. Instead, we found something precious." Smiled at his captain. "What did we find?" "Purpose, connection, a reason to keep flying beyond simple profit." Al gestured at the celebrating crew. "Look at them. They are family now. They would die for each other without hesitation. That is your doing, human. You taught us what pack loyalty truly means." "I did not teach anything," replied. "The capacity was always there. You just needed a reason to discover it." Gravy barked at something across the room. The larger dog had spotted a crew member carrying a plate of meat. He bounded away to investigate with his tail wagging furiously. Biscuit remained in his arms, content to observe from comfort. "Do you ever regret it?" Al asked. "The risk you took, the money you spent, the enemies you made." Looked down at Biscuit's sleeping face. The small dog's chest rose and fell with peaceful breathing. Her paws twitched as she dreamed of chasing something. "Not for a single moment," answered. "They are my family. I would do it all again without hesitation. I would do worse if necessary." Al believed him completely. He had seen what was capable of when protecting his dogs. The memory of the human's cold eyes still gave him shivers sometimes. The party continued late into the night cycle. Stories were shared. Songs were sung in languages that most could not understand but all could appreciate. Bonds were strengthened. Memories were made. Eventually the crew drifted off to their quarters. The cargo bay emptied except for the cleaning crew. Carried his sleeping dogs to his cabin. He placed them on their bed and covered them with a soft blanket. They curled together as they always did. Gravy's larger body wrapped protectively around Biscuit's smaller form. Watched them sleep for a long time. He thought about how close he had come to losing them. He thought about the universe full of dangers that threatened small beings with wagging tails. He thought about his responsibility to protect them for the rest of their lives. The weight of this responsibility did not burden him. It completed him. Humans had evolved as pack animals. They needed something to protect. They needed something to love. Without these connections, they became empty shells moving through existence without purpose. His dogs gave him purpose every day. Their joy when he returned to his cabin. Their comfort when he was sad. Their simple presence that reminded him he was not alone in the vast cold universe. They were worth more than any amount of credits. They were worth more than the ship that carried them. They were worth everything. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Engineer stood in the corridor holding a small package. "I apologize for the late hour," the old said, "but I wanted to give you something before tomorrow's departure." Accepted the package with curiosity. Inside was a handmade collar with the symbol of the Eternal Commerce engraved on the metal tag. 2 more collars lay beneath it, one sized for biscuit and one for gravy. "I made them myself," explained. "They mark your dogs as official crew members. Any station or port that sees these collars will know they are protected by our ship, by our pack." Felt emotion tighten his throat. He tried to find words, but they would not come. Instead, he reached out and pulled the old engineer into a hug, stiffened at first. His species rarely touched, but then he relaxed into the embrace. "Thank you," finally managed. "This means everything." Nodded and departed without further words. Closed his door and looked at the collars in his hands. Such small things, metal and fabric and craftsmanship, but they represented something far larger. He gently put the collars on his sleeping dogs without waking them. They fit perfectly. Biscuit sighed in her sleep and snuggled deeper into the blanket. Gravy's tail wagged once even while unconscious. Climbed into his own bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow the Eternal Commerce would resume its travels. New cargo awaited at distant ports. New adventures lurked beyond familiar stars. New challenges would test the crew's resolve. But was not worried. He had learned something important in the past year. The galaxy was vast and often dangerous. Threats existed around every corner and behind every nebula. Safety was an illusion that could shatter without warning. Yet none of this mattered as long as he had his pack, as long as beings stood together against the darkness, as long as loyalty remained stronger than fear. He closed his eyes and let sleep take him. In his dreams, he ran through endless fields with biscuit and gravy beside him. The sun was warm, the grass was soft, and somewhere in the distance, a ship waited to carry them to new horizons. The tiny wolves had come home, and they would never be lost again. Across the galaxy, other stories continued to unfold. Other humans protected other loved ones. Other crews discovered the power of true connection. The ripples from the Eternal Commerce spread outward, touching lives and changing perspectives. Some beings heard the story and dismissed it as exaggeration. Some heard it and felt inspired. Some heard it and learned to fear humans for the right reasons. All of them remembered. And in a universe full of wonders and horrors, that memory became something precious. A reminder that love could move mountains, that loyalty could burn brighter than any star, that 2 small creatures with wagging tails could ignite a fire that spread across the cosmos. The tale of the tiny wolves became legend. It was told on space stations and colony worlds. It was whispered in the dark corridors of criminal hideouts as a warning. It was celebrated in the halls of diplomats as evidence of human nature. But for it remained simple. It was the story of a man who loved his dogs, nothing more, nothing less, just love expressed through impossible action. And perhaps that was the most human thing of all.